Today we're going to have a look at the basics when using the Camera Raw processor in Photoshop. Now sometimes it's also called ACR, so whether it's ACR or Camera Raw, it's basically the same stuff that we're talking about. If you'd like to use the file from today's tutorial, you can get it from www.melnewman.com/YouTube downloads. I'm just going to open the image here first. And this photograph was shot deliberately to show an image that is badly exposed. When we start having a look at our Camera Raw, what most people do is they go straight to where it says exposure, fix up the exposure, and then go straight into Photoshop and start working on it. But that doesn't necessarily give us the best possible file that we could be working with. What we really want to do is make sure this histogram up the top here is as good as we can possibly get it, because then we know that we're not losing any data. Now, if you don't know much about histograms, Google them in YouTube, or check them up in YouTube, and you'll find that there's a whole heap of information about how to read these. Basically, we've got the whites up one end and the blacks up one end, and we've got all the different tones in between. Now, as you can see, this image is very dark, so everything is squished up on this black end, and up the white end here where this black line is, there's actually no information whatsoever. So this exposure, according to our histogram, is pretty rubbish, and we need to try and find the best way to fix this for us. Now, if we come in a little bit closer, we'll notice that the image probably needs a little bit of work with the color temperature as well. But we'll do that once we've fixed our exposure. Fixing the exposure in the histogram will not do anything to the color of this particular image. Let me just zoom back out again. Now, what we're going to do is do two things to fix this histogram first, and once we've got the exposure working right, then we can worry about everything else. If I go to my exposure slider, I can bring it up and down to fix the exposure, and you'll notice if it goes red, it's actually giving me a warning to say, look, this is all blown out and you're not going to get any detail in there whatsoever. If I want to be able to see that a little bit better, I can use my Alt key on the PC, and if I hold that down while I'm sliding my slider, you notice that it starts to come up with warnings and highlights. So I'm just going to come back to where I get to the point where we're right at the very edge of the limits there. And you'll see what's happened with the histogram up here is that we've actually slid this so that there's no black area now. So we've now got our highlights under control. We now need to do the same thing with the blacks. And if I hold down my Alt key again, you notice as I slide that down, I've still got a little bit of detail in there, but you can see that it's only a tiny little bit. Now, I would be much happier if I could hardly see anything at all. But look what it's done to our blacks up here. We now have detail in our blacks where this was basically squished up right up one end at one stage. But if we look at the image, it looks absolutely awful. It now looks way too bright. Well, that's where we can now use our eye, our trained eye, to move this to around about where we wanted the exposure. And see what happens in our histogram? We're not losing the detail. It's sliding between those two areas. So we're getting as much information as we can from this file. Now, this image was supposed to be shot a little bit on the dark side with a little bit more shadow in it. So we want to make sure that that works quite nice. Now, his skin tone is still looking a little on the, what I would class the cold side. Being that he's in his swimmers, it might be a good idea if we just correct the temperature up just a little bit to make that a little more of a golden image rather than too blue. It's nothing worse than having a blue child. So we can change our color temperature here. We can also change if we've got a little bit of a tint here as well. Let's have a look at the other sliders that we have in our basics. Now, we have a recovery. If we have a lot of white detail here that has been blown out, we can bring our recovery in and it will help us to recover some of those. Now, we've actually just gone and fixed all of that up, so we don't need any recovery on this particular image. The other thing that we could look at doing is bring some fill light in. So if we feel that we need a little bit more detail in those shadowy areas, simply by bringing the fill light up, we can fix that. Now I am going to just bring the fill light just in a little bit, just for a little bit of extra detail. We have our brightness, which we've already done, and we've also got our contrast here, which we can either increase or decrease. Again, this is where your eye comes into it. Now when we look at our colours down here, we've got clarity, vibrance and saturation. All of these are able to be used for different purposes. Now I find that my Canon always shoots a little bit too much on the oversaturated side. So most of my portraits, I actually drop my saturation down. Now I could do this in camera, but I prefer to do it when I bring my raw files in. Vibrance is different to saturation in that saturation saturates all of the colour, whereas vibrance changes the colours that are more like secondary colours. So if I increase the vibrance, you can see that it increases the colours of the blues and the greens, but it doesn't make a lot of change to the skin. It does a little bit, but not lots. Let's have a look what happens if we saturate it. Looks like he's got a really bad fake tan. So let's drop that back to where it was, to about -13 will be fine. And I'm just going to increase the vibrance just a little bit because I want to bring a little bit of extra colour into those bathers there. Now if we come into our clarity, and I'll just come up nice and close here so we can see what's going on. Our clarity, as we bring it up, you can see it actually allows us to go softer or harsher. So again, I'm just going to bring that up just a little bit because I want a little bit of contrast in this image, but not too much. Now this is the basics along here that we're looking at. There's a number of other things in the camera raw area that we can also look at. We can increase the size of our image. So this image was shot with a 40D Canon, and I've got my Adobe RGB as my color space, but I can change my bit to 16 or 8-bit. I can change the size from a 10.1 megapixel down to a 25.1 megapixel. I can also change the resolution, and I can put some extra sharpening in there if I want to. I've got a number of other sliders over here, and when we're looking at the basics, the only other basic one that we really need to have a look at is this sharpening or the detail. Because if we open this up at the moment and we look at this here, you can see this area is probably a little bit over sharpened. When we're looking at sharpening, we must have our size down here on 100%, or we will not be able to see what's going on with the sharpening on the actual image itself. Now with the sharpening up here, we need to sharpen, because when a raw file comes out of camera, it doesn't have any sharpening on it, so we do need to do a little bit of it, but it's very easy to over sharpen, and this is what happens when it does. See how we get this horrible sort of mottly look to it, which we definitely don't want. So what it's doing is it's sharpening the edge of the pixels, and by playing around with the radius we can see how much detail or how fine that can be, and same with our detail, you can see it comes stronger or softer. So the idea here is to play around with our radius and with our detail till we get it to a certain point. Now obviously this is way over sharpened. We also have a masking slider on here, and if we hold down the Alt key again and slide it, what happens is it puts a mask in. Now remember, anything that's black is like a black hole and is seen through, and anything that is white will be sharpened. So you can see here, this is way over sharpened, but you can see exactly where the sharpening is taking place. So if I drop my mask down a little bit, and then I bring my amount back to a reasonable amount instead of going too over the top there, we've now got quite a nice little sharpening on this image. Not overdoing it, but not underdoing it either. So now we've got this image as a well exposed, and we like the color temperature and all that sort of thing. We can simply open the image now in Photoshop to have a look at the difference between the unedited and the edited. So here's my edited version. Let's just open this again, and I'm going to reset this back to unedit it. So we'll go back to our camera roll defaults and let's open that up as well. And we'll just pop them side by side so we can have a look at the difference in the two images. That's a big difference, and it's an amazingly different starting point. If I had to bring this into Photoshop to work on it, I'd be spending quite a lot of time just fixing colour tones in the skin, whereas at least this is a good starting point. So I hope this has been a good basic lesson for opening your images in Camera Raw using CS5. And remember, if you need to get the files, you can get that particular file from melnewman.com YouTube downloads. See you next time.